The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent, Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. John Michel is passionate about changing lives through great leadership. He expresses that passion in his two books, No More Mediocre Me, How Saying No to the Status Quo Will Propel You from Ordinary to Extraordinary, and The Art of Positive Leadership, as well as articles in the Harvard Business Review, Huffington Post, National Geographic, Joint Forces Quarterly, and the Washington Post. John was a U.S. Air Force general responsible for leading the 15-nation effort to build a modern Afghan Air Force. In this episode, John offers his thoughts on effective leadership and discusses his personal leadership journey. So here's author, speaker, and former Air Force General John Michel. So you've been in there for 2 days now. What brought you here in the first place?
Well, a couple of things. One is I was very privileged to be exposed to the Barry-Wehmiller, if you will, methodology or orientation several years ago when I was still on active duty over at Scott Air Force Base. I was the Chief Change and Learning Strategist for TRANSCOM. All that means is I was privileged to be able to guide the development of their strategy, their global strategy, on how we're going to position for a post-war world. And for just to understand the context of that, that is the organization that's charged with actually moving people and things all over the planet for the United States of America. So cool, cool why? Mm-hmm. If we don't show up, you don't either.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But as we were working through the cultural part of that, you can appreciate any government organization where there's not a lot of movement, especially a place like Scott. We were struggling a little bit with the cultural piece of that. So as we started to work through some cultural dimensions, I had the opportunity to meet Matt. As we brought him in, we both worked for the same individual, General Johns, who was also a graduate of this program. And he says, hey, we really want to, him and Darcy said, why don't we get Bob out here to come talk to TRANSCOM? So we had the privilege to actually hear Bob's message firsthand, in person, and he had the chance to share that. Then I subsequently watched the TED Talk. And so I've been a fan of this, I won't say a fan of what's been happening here, because it aligns, at least for me, perfectly to the way I try and to lead my own life. Yeah. And so there was a deep resonance. Mm-hmm. And so now, after all those years, now I've just got back from Afghanistan and chose to get out in January. And Matt and I have been talking about, well, now come experience it from a different perspective, from the seats of this class. And I'm going to bring some teammates, I think, to the November communication class. Because now I'm doing what I did in the military, except in the business world. Mm-hmm.
So what kind of common ground did you find in here the last couple of days? Well,
I think getting back to when people are truly believe, using your own language, because again, it's very similar language. When people truly believe that their leadership cares about them, there's nothing they can't do, and there's nothing they're not willing to do. But most importantly, they, when you get a chance to see someone's, or when they feel that those that they are surrounded by have a deep appreciation for them, are truly committed to their best interest. Again, this is where I've seen organizations flourish and thrive in every single person they touch. So as you talk about it here, it spills over into their workplaces, their homes, their worship spaces, and their communities. And it's really the way change happens, right? Change happens one person at a time. And my favorite word's intentionality. And what I see in this, the reason I'm so excited about seeing more and more people become familiar with what Barry-Wehmiller is doing, is we tend to overcomplicate so much of our lives. And what we realize is that there's an elegance and simplicity, and that simplicity is make the most of every interaction. And that's really how I would distill down this whole idea, is if we showed up in a much more intentional way, and that intention was, I really want to make this person feel valued and know that I care about them deeply as a person. Nothing. It doesn't matter where I'm at in the company. It doesn't matter where they're at. I'm just going to approach them. I'm going to treat them with respect. I'm going to want to learn something about them in a genuine way. It's amazing what can happen. And life is lived richly through relationship. Bob and I were talking about this today. No matter what people achieve or whatever they do, I'm pretty convinced that in that very last flash of your life, it will only be faces and people that you've touched and interacted with are the things you're going to remember. It's not going to be any of those other things. So again, so you've got, and then you talk about the principles here where the value of inviting people to be part of a conversation. Maybe people who never otherwise thought they wouldn't be invited. How many stories have I heard in the last 2 days about people who have worked for 30-something years and never felt that their contribution mattered until, fortunately, Barry-Wehmiller came in, acquired the company, went into the very intentional act of engaging and giving every single person a chance for their voice to be heard. So when I go back through the principles of, again, whether it's how we have celebrate the unique contribution of every person that we call their talents and skills, how do we actually create opportunities to communicate with greater sincerity, grace, mutual respect? Where we talk about how do we spend a little more time celebrating, being intentional in that celebration, being creative, like I see, cowbells, whatever it is, and letting the human imagination be our only limitation to how we would celebrate other people. Again, it's magical. Yeah. So there's elegance and simplicity, and I see it here in the reinforcement of how Barry-Wehmiller continues to conduct themselves every day.
Yeah.
How do you get, though, we understand the why we do this. You understand why you do it, and it should be done. How do you change mindsets, though, of those that don't believe in it? How do we do that? Because that's what needs to happen. We need to have other like-minded leaders. How do you make those? How do you find those?
So I think that at least for me, what I tell folks is people, if there's a way that they can opt out of change or opt out of being, find a way to not be different, they'll do it, right? And so one of the things that I, honestly talked with Matt and others for the last couple of days is there are folks even in this classroom that I saw that will go, yeah, this works great here, and then they can find, I'll say, a convenient excuse like, well, we don't have a Bob, or we're not this, or we don't have that, and I only have 15 people. So either the scale of it, the totality, or it's just so overwhelming. So one element of that is, I think, as we find and start to celebrate other examples of organizations and people who live outside the Barry-Wehmiller space and again, this is a conversation I had with Bob. I'm fortunate to have a company now with 18,000 people. We're now going to align to be able to take several of these principles and apply them in a very intentional way there to start to create now another story of say, wait a second. This works in transportation, this works in packaging, this works in healthcare. So we start to create more and more social proof. And the more social proof we have across a diversity of industries with a different group of people, the harder it becomes for people to come up with excuses as to why they want to be different. We know that the vast majority of folks, because it's inconvenient, it's uncomfortable, and all the reasons they don't want to. I think some folks, on the other hand, it is so overwhelming, we get back to the point that we talked about at the end of the day. What one thing can you do? And I think if we made the default option, and I think you do a great job here, of making that one thing you could do, celebrate people better, because that could be free. So I actually think I think the book is going to be huge, because a lot of this is how do we expose people to the message so they don't necessarily have to come here to the campus. They don't have to be directly in your first order. Right now, if we limit ourselves to first order interaction, we know it's going to take a really long time. Mm-hmm. So if you're asking about how do we scale, how do we actually give people a greater sense of clarity and a greater sense of belief that they can do this, I think it's already in motion, right? You have a diversity of industries that you're now starting to expose, and there'll be some of those folks. Ideally, there'll be a way that you guys are capturing that story. Maybe a year from now, how are you going back and capturing the story of which people in that particular room and their spheres of influence, right? How do we capture that story and now make it part of what you teach?
We're actually going to capture it in a couple months, which sort of pushes them,
okay.
Like, you know what I mean? That's sort of the way we want to do it is, okay, tell us 3 months down the road what you're doing to deploy in your organization.
Exactly.
And if they come back and say, well, we're not doing anything yet, then that kind of pushes them a little bit as well.
Exactly. But now by enlarging the storyline, it starts to become less, Barry-Wehmiller becomes the real manifestation and the one that's been able to make this a mission of the organization to say more people need to we have a responsibility, this gift that Bob talks about, to be able to share that with people as you do exactly what you're describing, inviting more diverse people to come here, exposing folks in a more meaningful way. Again, the book's going to add another whole dimension of exposure. I think you'll start to see the natural effect of people just wanting to be affirmed that they matter and are valued as human beings. It doesn't matter what they do in the hierarchy. That's why, again, I love that you come back to, we kind of felt like this before as kids, right? Then life kind of gets complicated sometimes by our own way. And this resonates so deeply because it uncomplicates and strips away every single other element, the external, and gets us back at our core. which is, I jokingly call, when we're 5 years old, right? Think about the simple joy that we have as 5-year-olds. I believe we're our best little humans at 5. We love people very freely, right? We're gracious and forgiving and kind. That's actually kind of all the same things I heard here. Mm-hmm. And then life starts to get more complicated because then school somehow squeezes out some of that. And then one day we wake up and it's like, my goodness, it's so complicated. So we're really in some way just kind of stripping all that back down to bring us back to our very best natural selves. And I think that the more people that see that simplicity and can make one deposit and you guys follow up on it, then you build this really cool, I almost have a vision of when I think about it, what do we call the when you sew together a bunch of different
quilt?
Yeah, so think about it. So that's it's the word. So it's almost a quilt of varied industries and varied people who normally would not intersect, but a commonality or what actually binds that whole thing together is this sense of caring deeply no matter where you're placed.
Well, I think there should be some intentionality about the targets as well at some point. I think we will have to do that. We will have to say, wow, we haven't had people in these kinds of industries and we need to pull them in. Matter
of fact, again, that's the conversation we had even with Bob, is to say, okay, let's offer the transportation industry now. So let's very intentionally say, got manufacturing. Cool thing about transportation, not sexy. Driving buses and all that, but all of a sudden when you do as you do well here and go, hold on a second, every single bus driver we got on the street in 180 cities, they're interacting with. How many humans are walking in and out of that door? How about our other vans that come up, pick up people who are disabled in the paratransit business? Think about all those touch points. And on the scale, my God, that's magnificent. Okay, so we got that one. What about the restaurant business, right? So you start to move through that, and all of a sudden this, whether you call it a quilt or this mosaic, is amazing after a while. Because then what we're really shown is, pick your industry. It has nothing to do with industry, right? It's all about the human experience. Mm-hmm. And then I think it becomes, again, all these make it harder and harder for people to opt out. Now, there will always be opt-outers. Mm-hmm. And that's fine if they choose not to, to leverage and actualize their leadership as they can. That's a different issue, right? I mean, you can only there's a certain level of volunteerism to this conversation, right? We have to volunteer to make ourselves, to some it'll be really vulnerable because, you're CEO and you walk in and you're doing some of these things. I'm not sure that's CEO behavior. I mean, I saw some folks struggling in there to go, okay, I'm a financial analyst. How is this going to come down for me, right? But I think as they get exposed more and more to the diversity of not just the range of lives that can be touched, and the more that they can understand that if you just did one thing and it turns out to be with your spouse, that's an equal win, so you don't have to transform a whole company like you guys have done with 9,500 people. So I think, that's why it has all come, very long answer to your question about what I've seen as an affirmation of all your beliefs for many years now are getting much more finely honed. You started this journey, I think, in earnest about 13 years ago, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
In 2002, I believe, is what you have hanging on the wall. I hear a lot from that time frame. You got some of the cats now that are leading this program. And you can just see the level of sophistication is rising mm-hmm. as you build out the university, as you now start to export these programs. So I can't even imagine what 5 more years will do.
Well, you've kind of been doing double duty for a while. When you were on active duty, you mm-hmm. were still writing mm-hmm. books and speaking. When you retired, you probably could have just done single duty, maybe focused on that, maybe expand that a little bit more, but you've taken on this new kind of challenge or opportunity, however you want to define it. Why did you decide to do that?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I will tell you the one thing that makes my heart sing is I've found that I've had the privilege of leading since 2002. And what I mean is, so from a squadron to a special operations group to a wing, and then in my last assignment, building the Afghan Air Force in a war zone, which was pretty cool. 14 different nations, $6.7 billion project. And we achieved astounding things in 13 months. Astounding. Because goes right back to why I'm such a big believer and fan of what Barry-Wehmiller, and I would say evangelist for it. I use sometimes slightly different words because I saw the power of when you can actually get people to believe that they do have something special to contribute. And as a leader, I only exist for one reason, and that is to create the conditions to equip, encourage, empower, and inspire them. Those are the 4 things. And so I've always used writing, which is not like natural and is hard, as a way to push myself to go, I've got to learn to articulate my ideas. So I go out and give speeches because it forces me to stay fresh on ideas. And it keeps me now where I can, ideally, when I'm given opportunities, I can make sure that I am not, haven't fallen back into my old comfortable ways and just resting on my first 50 years. Mm-hmm. So I do it part to challenge myself, But two, because my heart sings and I love being able to create those conditions, and somehow in my journey in the Department of Defense, I started to get, if you will, tagged as the guy that comes in and does really massive level structural change. I had a wing that was the most broken wing in the United States Air Force. When I was given this wing, Grand Forks Air Force Base, they had for 50 years flown big airplanes and done magnificent things all over the globe, and BRAC, so the Base Realignment Commission, took all their airplanes away and gave them this thing called unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones. People there, they didn't understand. They lost their mission. Their why was gone. They didn't even understand why they existed anymore. So I got a call to say, hey, congratulations, you're going to go lead this organization. And just so you know, they are leading the Air Force in every single negative indicator there is. Suicide, divorce, domestic abuse. So it was magnificent. So it was really an opportunity to go there and show that through high people-centric practices, we can actually get an organization to not just find its way, but to lead the way. I'm proud to say years later, Grand Forks Air Force Base is now one of only 6 places in the United States that is leading the journey for America into unmanned aerial systems. So we basically celebrated what we had been given, treated it as a gift, and then now created a whole new path. We saw the same thing in other assignments, and then the last one was in Afghanistan. We got there and we were told, hey, you've got to accelerate by 2 years, you've got to slash your people, and you've got to actually reduce your budget dramatically. So what I went in to do changed in a month after the president decided that we're going to leave Afghanistan sooner. Problem is, the Air Force is complicated. You can only bake that cake so fast. But we were able to do some things largely by focusing on one thing, relationship. First, get all 14 nations that were there to go, hey, just how you show up is going to make the greatest single difference. We're advisors. We're helping people build something special. 2, we involved the Afghans in a whole new way, brought in emotional intelligence training, went high human. So all the consistent message and all these massive transformation, all of them with B's for billions and lots of stuff, always was high human. It was through the principles of inviting people to be in a conversation, being honest and creating opportunities for how people's voices were heard, creating feedback loops. Goes right back to what you asked a while ago. A lot of the things that we talk about in here, the journey of continuous improvement, how do you make that real? But a lot of it is through the process of inclusion. And so then I got out and I was like, okay, you're right, I could write and consult, do a lot of things, but my heart is into, give me a really hard project that has the opportunity to change lives. And so, my gift, who would have thought I could land in the largest private transportation company in America, being given the opportunity to say, right to the principal level, in the C-suite, to go, please architect our transformation journey on where we're going to go for the next 40 years. Culture and all, and to be interested. So I have a feeling that the feeling I have is, wow, I kind of prayed for that and it was made available to me, as unlikely as it is. I need to steward it well. That's the other reason I'm here. I do not have all this figured out. I need to surround myself with folks who also are committed to this journey, but have different tools, have a different way of talking about it, so that I can take my deep passion and align it with other people with deep passion but different knowledge. And so what comes out of this now is Matt and I will meet with the team. I talked to, we talked about it today with Bob, and say, we're going to start taking several very intentional things you do here, and we're going to link them into the journey, because I just happen to have an opportunity that together we can touch 18,000 more lives. And how many people do you think that we touch every single day in passengers? Every day we can touch hundreds of thousands of lives just by saying, we're going to pick celebration first. Okay, I'm going to lean on Barry-Wehmiller to say, help me celebrate our people better so that they can celebrate our clients and our customers better. And now we have another win that we all get to share together. So what I look forward to is a day 2 years from now, or whatever day it's going to be, teaching in some class. And all of a sudden it's like, let us tell you a different story about another not-so-sexy business. But the massive impact they've had in hundreds of thousands of lives every single day, times a couple of years. The one thing about, when you're a general for life. So you have to steward that well. That's another thing you have to steward well, is you've kind of always been given this platform, right? Yeah. There's very few things that you get to carry no matter where you're at. It's a big kind of joke in my company. It is not like John, it is like the general, okay? One, there's a novelty and kind of a fun thing to it, and everyone's like, damn, we need a general. The transportation industry don't even know what the hell's going on. They're just like, what is this dude doing here? So I would tell you, there is not, in that novelty, is power. Right? It's power in the standpoint that it forces people to kind of stop for a second, pay attention. And in this world of busyness and distraction, how do we steward that well?
Where would you say your leadership journey began?
So I was very fortunate. We talked about this at dinner. I had the privilege of sitting next to Kyle and across from Bob and with 3 other just fantastic individuals last night. And I had that question, actually. It's who's been the most influential role model or leader? For me, it was it's easy because it was my father. My father also grew up in the military. So he immigrated to the United States with one goal. He always wanted to be part of the United States Air Force. He grew up outside a military base in France, watched these airplanes and said, that's magnificent, and grew up not having a lot. So did it, one-way ticket, quintessential story. Week after landing, joins Air Force, off starts 30-year career. When I was younger, we spent a lot of time overseas, so it's kind of a close community. And I would always watch, kind of just these interactions. And, at 10 or whatever, you don't really realize you're being encoded. You just are watching. Mm-hmm. But you notice the same high commitment to people type of, just always gracious interactions, and if it's 2 o'clock, always available to serve the people that he was responsible for. But where it really manifests for me is I was 12 years old and we were playing sandlot baseball like you probably did. And man, I'll not forget. They threw this and I hit the best. I think it was the longest, awesomest shot ever. I was like, that is awesome. Especially a 12-year-old. Like, I just knocked the socks off that. And then I watched it keep going right through a window. And I was like, uh-oh. And I'll just forget, like a 12-year, I just went from elation to massive, oh my gosh, I am in such deep trouble. We're living on a military base overseas, and I just clunked a ball through someone's plate glass window. So I literally ran home. And I was just beside myself. And my dad was working late that night. And I just remember I'm sure I was crying. So I took whatever pennies and things I did, and I was wrote this note, put it in an envelope, and then I went to bed really early. And I'll never forget, because I was like, this is terrible. It was really late, because he was, again, with his responsibilities, we had a lot of different folks. That night he came in and woke me up, and he had this envelope in his hand. And what I really learned in that moment is he was like, I'm going to let you know, got the one. That's the fact that you would be willing, that you were so honest and forthright about the fact that you did this thing is a lesson that I just want to let you know how much I appreciate that. So all of a sudden, this response I was expecting is nothing it was like, wow. And what I saw was grace and forgiveness and what real leadership looked like. Mm-hmm. It's in whatever moment, whether it's at home or whether it's, again, with those that you serve. How can you just show up in a real, authentic way and realize that every one of those opportunities is a tremendous moment that can leave a lasting imprint. So 12 years old, I'm like, ding, ding, I know what leadership looks like. And then from that time on, we're still great friends. We talk, we give advice. We actually, so it's kind of like more a partnership now, so he'll be happy to provide coaching along the way. He's a big fan. I brought him into the general leadership community. So I've had that great privilege, to be honest with you. And so early on is where I kind of adopted this concept of being other-centered or otherly, which is what the second book was all about that I wrote in Afghanistan. And that's why, again, another touch point. What you talk about truly human leadership here, I just use the concept of otherliness, because I see so much of what doesn't work in leadership stems from the cycle of self-interest. Look around. Bob talks about it a lot. We are in tough times. We are the thing is, the opportunity and the desire and the need for leadership has probably never been greater, not just in America, but across the world. Think about what's happening at so many levels. Unfortunately, we have so many cycles and examples and manifestations of self-interest in people in positions of authority, whether they're politicians, business people gone bad. This is why we need more contrast. Change happens when people see contrast. Mm-hmm. So we need more of the other, those who celebrate the other. Which, when I look at the whole when I look at your whole model, I'm like, yeah, you're all about the other. If I were to distill it down, I was like, well, damn, we're saying the same thing. We're just slightly going back to using different words.
Sure.
So I saw otherliness early. I saw otherliness frequently. And then in my own life journey, and I lost my way for a season. I got really focused back in that cycle of self-interest. Early success was not good for me. I really did not become the person that I liked. My wife, fortunately, helped me crystallize that moment when, quite candidly, she says, this just ain't going to work. I had 2 young kids, and that was a devastating moment in life, but it was also a crystallizing moment in life. And in 2000, I faced this crossroads of either go the way of the world or make a really tangible commitment to being the kind of person you really need to be and can be. For me, a lot of that was largely spiritual. And in that way painful 1.5-year journey, fighting my way back, to what is I think a magnificent story, 24 years married, but in that crystallizing moment, I used that in class today to talk about, I was looking across my timeline, and I look at one of the inflection point that still stands out for me across pretty marvelous opportunities that I've had in a blessed life, is this point of magnificent meekness. The greatest pain was the moment that I will never forget. I emerged more the person I wanted to be on the other side. So every day I fight to get back to that person. Not the one that was up here, but the one that is. And you always do that by focusing on the other. Is that helpful? So to me, my whole life is, and it's not easy, the world wants to pull us back into these self-interest cycles. It wants us to measure success by all this stuff. And I think it's a battle we all fight at some level. The more successful you are, the tougher it can be, right? I mean, I think we see that. But that's why, again, a person like Bob, all the folks I see in this company, they're so good at setting all that stuff aside, and you walk away going, no, they're really living this concept of it is about the other. It doesn't matter necessarily who they are. You talk about lack of titles and hierarchies. They serve a purpose, but those purposes are superficial. So I think it's one of the greatest examples that Barry-Wehmiller sets for others, is it isn't about that. It's about how you show up.
One of the things that you keep kind of hitting on over and over is that you're continually learning leadership lessons. Even the fact that you came here to St. Louis for a couple of days to spend some time with us, just to, compare notes and see what was out there. Afghanistan, you've touched on your experience there a few times. What were some of the leadership lessons you learned there?
So, I think one of the biggest ones I learned is what I call the power of creating coalitions of the unlikely. And what I mean by coalition of the unlikely is we probably find ourselves in life where we're, kind of drawn to people like us, or we got to solve a problem and we got to fall back into what we're trained on. And what I found there is we really had some daunting challenges. One, we couldn't afford the Air Force we were building. Pretty big problem. No one had actually emerged that. So one of the things was change, right? You want to get to those couple of key variables, and then you want to leverage those. So external agents say, we need to do something different. In this case, it was the Secretary of Defense. And we need to change the way. So it was that level of game, which I kind of dig. And then there's this other side to go, okay, now I can't get there from here. You just look around at what you've got. I got 800 folks. We got an active war zone going on. And a lot of it was around contracting and completely reinventing. We didn't have those skills. So we started to look around. And I had seen this lesson played out before, and now doing it again very intentionally at MV. So what I said is, okay, so what do we need? If we could find anybody we want, who would they be? We went out and found folks who were masters at lean, continuous journey, right? So I found a person who happened to be, his day job was the Undersecretary of Defense for maintenance. He was deployed in Afghanistan. We hit it off and said, all right, dude, here's the deal. We can do this magnificent thing, but I'm going to need some help. He's like, I'm with you. He sent me 2 of his people in a war zone, full time. So now I got these cats that I otherwise normally would not have been in the family. Then I said, okay, we can't do this contracting piece. So we called back the United States into the Secretary of Defense's office and said, okay, here's the deal. If we want to do this and save you a lot of money and be able to accelerate and all this, I need some folks to come out to Afghanistan, a little field trip. They're like, stand by. So we said, but this is very specific what we need. My point is they sent 14 magnificent people for 3 weeks who worked 20 hours a day with my team to completely recalibrate all our contracts. All our contracts, let me just tell you, being completely honest, we found 91 errors in the contracts just by virtue of the cycle. I won't get into all the reasons why, but when you live on cycles of people coming and going at a year, all well-intentioned, what happens over time in all those seams, like we see happen here, is we just keep stacking all these things that become misaligned to the new way you got to be. And in this case, it turned out to be $1.1 billion of needless money. So we, in a period of time, rewrote every single contract with a long-term view, and we made the system sustainable. And so what happened is this coalition of the unlikely is going, being honest enough about looking around about the talents that you do have as a team, then figuring out what is the way to actually graft in the talents that you need externally, people you would normally not hang out with, but together now, you, for a season, for a very clearly defined purpose, come together, you celebrate success, and then you go back to what you were doing. And so I found that our ability to achieve very, very significant success in very, very rapid fashion was around this alignment and this willingness to move beyond groups of people that we either could control or were comfortable with or even knew, and become very aggressive. Matter of fact, I reached out to UCLA and which had never been done. In fact, had them do analyses for us, and so all of a sudden we had all these different people, but on one storyline: build an Afghan Air Force that is sustainable and affordable, so that they have a better chance of having the kind of country that they want to have. And so it was pretty cool. So this concept of coalition of the unlikely, I think, is really powerful. I think businesses could learn from it. In some regard, this conversation, being here with Barry-Wehmiller, is kind of a coalition of the unlikely. I mean, y'all are in this industry in packaging, and we're in transportation. The fact that we're coming here to go, okay, Matt, let's get some of the team members and let's align some of the practices that we want to use to transform our company, I think is another example. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's power in that. So that's probably one of the most profound one. And the other one was, I think I shared earlier, the power of going, I'll call it high human, but inclusion. You talked about inclusion, right? And the power of co-creation. I'm a big fan of appreciative inquiry, which is, right, the process of asking a lot of affirming-oriented questions. So questioning where you are, questioning where you can go, but building on the best of what is. So again, I hear a lot of the same language here about it. Wow, imagine if we actually spent more time focusing on the good instead of the bad, so all that kind of abundant stuff. I believe in that. And so when you actually create a process by which people could be included, as you know, in co-creating their preferred future state. And I'm talking, we would invite I'd have staff sergeants. We would do something that we call random sample club. All of us really smart types would come together and build this plan. And our stuff actually would go all the way up to like the real grown-ups, like the SecDef and other people, right? Because this was a pretty high-stakes game. But we also know there's a lot we don't know. So we would say every time we got to a point that we said, okay, we think this is good. We have sold ourselves. We're like, okay, stop. We would literally go down and walk the hallways, clean everybody who was in the camp of all ranks and from whatever nationalities. All the principals would move away from the table. We would then put everybody else at the table and we would pitch to them. Not a single perfect plan that we pitched to our random sample club ever survived, right? And so what that reinforced, it completely changed the vibe. Now they're like, holy crap, I'm not just doing this or whatever I'm doing. I literally own this design. And so what happened is through the process of invitation and co-creation, ownership skyrockets. Ownership for outcomes. After a while, I couldn't kick people. Now, we had nothing else to do in Afghanistan. We worked 24 hours a day. But literally, it was astounding when people really, and you've seen it. So it's the same things that you talk about, right? Inviting people to, and not just inviting them, but really making them part of a process to give them that sense of ownership. So I'll just leave it at those two, if that's fair. I mean, but both of those involve human beings. Inviting people to the conversation in a meaningful way through co-creation, creating coalitions that are unlikely, hanging out with people that aren't like you. It's actually pretty enriching.
Yeah. When you go back to the office, whenever you're going back, beginning next week into this week, what's kind of the first thing you're going to sit down and go, I think this is where we're going to go next? I'm very confident that it will be in picking the one that is most important, and it's also most tangible, and that is celebration. There are so many opportunities that we walk past every single day, because I do believe, the magic is in the interaction. And so I think it's a lot easier for me to help arm my fellow teammates with new, practical, thoughtful ways and awareness about, hey, if we can actually make just these couple of things a priority, we're going to be able to already, those investments, whether they come back to the bottom line, it won't matter. It'll be doing something that actually bring us back to our best selves, that actually at the same time are moving us in the direction of being the company we want to be, which is a company that better serves our people inside as much as the people outside. And it again, it's and also, to be fair, probably one of the simplest. Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter @Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.